wedding. 15 miles south of Seattle and halfway across Puget Sound to the west is Maury Island. Shaped like an arrowhead aimed at the mainland, green is the inner fold of a grass blade. It can be seen from the air, cradled in a crook of an elbow of water. Tourists ride over in ferries to watch for whales and UFOs. Jets turn around overhead on their final approach to the airport. Even on days when there is no rain, mist filters through the evergreens until it pulls apart like threadbare cloth and burns off.
This is the start of The Great Offshore Grounds, the second novel by Vanessa Veselka. The author takes us on an epic journey, not just a road trip of two sisters in search of the woman who gave birth to one of them, but a story of religion, healthcare, and the hustle it takes when you live at the poverty line in America. Veselka herself is no stranger to living on the road, literally. She was a teenage runaway who escaped a serial killer, traveled the world as a musician, settling down to take a job as a union organizer. Discovering she was really a writer at Reed College in her 30s, her debut novel was the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize-winning Zazen. It has been said that poor decisions make great stories. The Great Offshore Grounds is full of both. When last Vanessa was in Spokane, she stayed at the Travelodge downtown, so it's been a bit. Joining her across the screen tonight is Kristi Burns, Northwest Passage's book club coordinator. We are now so pleased to welcome Vanessa Veselka to tonight's virtual Northwest Passages stage. Welcome to our first stop on the book tour of your bus route, actually, Vanessa. You were telling me about that earlier. That's pretty awesome. Talk to me about what is going on where you are right now, which is Portland?
Yeah, I'm in Portland. So like you guys, we're all dealing with smoke and fire. We have more militias active probably, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of craziness and rumors that were not helpful through this. There's all sorts of folks celebrating the fact that we managed to get down in a very unhealthy territory eventually today, but we've been above the hazard scale for about 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, the 500s in the air quality that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, it's hitting us in Spokane as well, and so we just hope that the fires abate, the weather will kind of cooperate, and the first responders will get some relief. Because gosh, and school started here. School started in Portland as well. These kids that are virtually in school or even in person, it's all too crazy. But this book tour, for a woman who likes to roam. What's it like for you to just be in
doing a world tour of Zoom?
Yeah, doing a world tour of Zoom. Well, yeah, I mean, this for this book, which we're talking about tonight, The Great Offshore Grounds, your second novel, this is literally mimicking your road trip. Well, not your road trip, Livy and Cheyenne's road trip. So Spokane's first stop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did some other, some initial dates around it, but what we really wanted to do was there are 3 road trips in the book. Mm-hmm. And because the book is about America in so many ways, and that's not a story you can tell from one location or one belief system or one myth system.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to recreate for fun a kind of virtual way of doing the trips, and also because so much of it goes through smaller towns or places. So my publicist, they were just, Knopf has been amazing. And so they said, okay, let's try it. And so it's a combination of doing events like this, but then also doing book groups or doing small public small public library events, or, and talking about history, talking about sometimes my experiences in the area, sometimes the character sections in the area, and just sort of drawing a line that people can come along with us through social media or other ways if they can't join an event. To sort of, it's an opportunity to show different parts of how the America of the novel comes into focus, and hopefully people will enjoy it.
I'm sure you were talking though about how your experiences, maybe the characters' experiences. I want to talk a little bit more about how you became a writer, because you didn't really have a traditional upbringing and you didn't really come to this. I would say it, well, is there any one traditional path at any one point? But how did it happen? I mean, a union organizer, is that leads yourself to be a writer? Although you did write a piece in Daily Beast, actually, that I want to talk about, but let's talk about how you
Okay.
became a writer.
Well, I mean, I first became a musician, and music was a very, very big part of my life. It was the center of my life for many, many years, and I didn't imagine that I was going to end up being something else necessarily. So a lot of my traveling around the country came from when I was 15. I hitchhiked about 15,000 miles around the country, and then when I was in my 20s, living in Seattle, I was touring a lot, and so I was constantly touring around the country as well. Um, so those things informed how you see place, and I think I was trying to put into songs things that belonged in the stories for a really long time. I think that it didn't help my you know it didn't help my writing in a rock format.
No.
It was just sort of too cluttered in some ways. When I look back, I see the things that I'm starting to be able to say as a 51-year-old in prose now, in
I
a
see.
460-page novel that I was trying to put into a 3-minute song. And of course,
When you were in your 20s in Seattle and it
yes,
wasn't all, you had more to say.
yeah, and there was a lot more to say, and I think it wasn't the right medium for me ultimately, even though. And once I started writing, I began to write music differently. I began to write music completely differently because I wasn't trying to put everything into it, and I began to enjoy it for a more sparse medium. But how I became a writer, uh, you know, was I always kept journals. I kept journals since I was 5. I have literally journals from since I was 5, and I always wrote about ideas or things or sketches that I was seeing. And so writing was very natural to me. Both my parents were writers in their way. My mother was a journalist. My father, has boxes and boxes of short stories he never showed anybody, um, except for maybe to woo younger
You now?
women. I don't know, but we'll stay out of that.
Yeah.
So I think writing was normalized in my household. It was expected that you would
Put a sentence
verbally
together and tell a
put
story.
a sentence together. I used it mostly to do things to get past authorities and guardians of institutions. Like it was always the Rimbaud has this great letter that he writes, I believe, to Georges Isambard. I'm probably saying that wrong, when he gets thrown in jail, and it's one of my favorites because it just starts out, "Dear sir, what you advised me not to do, I did." And then it goes into come take me home, feed me, get me out of jail, let me live with you for a while.
Yeah.
And that, I feel like so much of my writing was initially letter writing on petitioning. It was a petitioning for something of why I didn't need to follow the steps that needed to be followed to apply to college. Why I
Because
didn't
that would be traditional and you
well,
were, the different path.
desperation drove a lot of that, not an ideology of being special in that sense. It was just more like, hey, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
Let's see if this works. And so where it came to be more of a real thing for me, where I had an artistic connection, wasn't until I'd had my child and I wasn't able to tour, and I was in a kind of dark period in my life in some ways and a beautiful period in another. And I felt very trapped, unable to play, I had a very young kid, I was broke, just a lot of things like that. I just sort of felt disconnected, and I started writing at that point and going back to school.
So with that creative thing that creativity out of the fact that you were a mom, because it's interesting in the Great Offshore Grounds, which actually, if for those of you watching, there's a link above here that will take you to Aunties, and you can purchase this book, and there will be a signed book plate from Vanessa in the book from Aunties for Northwest Passages Book Club members. I lost my train of thought. That happens.
You were asking about the
Yeah.
generative nature of motherhood.
Well, yeah, motherhood. Okay, so there is and actually a question is coming from Ron. How many characteristics do you and Kristen share, which is the mom here in the book?
Ah,
I, uh, I don't think that she's much of a mom, but we can get to that later. But are there qualities that you share with the mothers depicted in this book?
I think that the things that I would share with Kirsten are less who she is as a mom,
Mm-hmm.
and in more, you know, I don't think of it that way. So
Okay.
I come to it anew to go like, huh. Um, I did consciously know when I started to write the characters and started to write the sisters, I was very aware that, I wanted to write characters in that age range for a very particular reason about something I was interested in.
Okay.
But then I also didn't want to be constricted. I wanted to have an older woman in there. And I remember thinking, because I started this book like 8.5 years ago, and I was thinking,
Wow.
oh, yeah. So, so I was thinking,
That's a long time.
I want a woman who's
Yeah.
older in the book. And I sort of guessed at it. I said, oh, let's make her 52 in the book, which I will be 52 in March. But that wasn't supposed to, I was supposed to be much younger when the book came out. But no, Kirsten is, what I appreciate about her is she has this fierce belief that in her own autonomy that she passes on to her daughters very specifically, but she has a fierce belief that she gets to make up the rules. She gets to say, some of the ways that she lives in the world are dicey and
yeah,
all
well,
sorts
and
of things.
not to be spoiling anything, but I mean, yeah, she does try to make all of the rules. She's part of the connection, and Livy and Cheyenne, she withholds information from them that then Cyril, their birth father, decides to give to them on their wedding day. It's the opening scene of the chapter of the book,
Yeah.
so, or opening two or three chapters. So that's not. I'm trying not to give away too much of.
That's not a spoiler. Yeah.
But she also does decide to get a job to have health benefits, so that, and then she postpones and postpones until, and I think a lot of people do that in this country, especially right now. They'll take jobs to have health insurance. They will wait till they can go to the doctor, and then things advance that are then beyond their control, and then they have no say. But then that's the say that they want to have. But
yeah, it is a hard thing. It's a hard thing, and it's true for so many people. That you have a friend. We had a really good friend that just last week had a terrible two friends. They were together, had an incredibly awful car wreck. Life very, very scary. And the very first thing you think is, oh my God, I hope they have health insurance.
Yeah.
Right? Because you know what's coming. You know how much of an edge people live on. You know how, one of the things that it said earlier in the book is Livy's talking about working, and she's talking about that fragility. And she's like, a broken arm can ruin my life.
Yeah.
Like, I'm hanging on by this. I break my arm, and it's a spiral that I will end up losing my place, losing my, and so, and that's for a smaller kind of health insurance issue. So that goes through, that fragility is in the novel, and it's there in one way or another for all the characters. And I think the characters, somebody asked me, it's like they all seem like they're withholding different bits of information from each other, and that's key. And it is true, but the reason they're withholding it so much is they don't want to topple the other person emotionally or financially. They're holding it so that they all know they're in a fragile space.
It's not control. It's emotionally believing that they're helpful. I mean, it
in most cases. I think it's more like, I know I don't have resources. I know you don't have resources. You don't need to worry about me for something you can't fix. You don't need to worry about me for something that you can't change.
Well, that sounds very much like Essex, actually, a little bit, who works so hard on wanting to gain his freedom, but yet then wants to become a caretaker for this woman that he was well, that's a dicey conversation.
Mhm.
Let me go back to Zazen for a
Okay.
moment, between what fans of Zazen would find. I love handling this book. You know why? I learned this word today, deckle edge. It's
They
these,
made a gorgeous book. I
it
love
is,
it.
it's gorgeous. And just holding the book, I mean, I read the book the first time through on my iPad. And then when the book came out, I was like, oh yay, I get to hold it. But yeah, it is so much fun to hold. There is that, and there is so much in the book. But what would fans of Zazen find? I think that's a different audience.
Some of it is, some of it isn't. You know, that I was very curious about that. Some of the people who were the earliest fans of Zazen that reached out to me, and that I got to know a little bit. People who wrote about books or were just very interested book lovers, and I sent it to them early because I was curious.
Early in the process of 8 years. So
No. What I mean is I sent it to them, months and months ago, or, in
Okay.
some form. And I was really curious. I was like, I wonder, and I said to all of them, I don't know if this is the same. And I think I was really surprised that many of them wrote back and they said, no, this is different. And I like it better. Like and I was really kind of surprised. And I think that's not true for everybody. I think that, because part of it is when you meet, some of it is you're interested in one thing and not interested in another, or you have an opinion one way or another. But setting those things aside, a book has a relationship with you to the moment in which you read it. It has a relationship to you to like who you're in love with at that time, what job you're working, where you read it, who gave it to you, like all of those things are wrapped into the experience of reading something that you love or like. And you can't duplicate that experience. It's also the same for a time of life. The books I read when I was like 20 to 26 had such an impact, or 18 to 26, that area had such an impact on me in such a formative way that shaped all of these things for me that it's hard to feel that way about a book quite in the same sort of totalitarian sense of like finding religion the way I did, and so it's also a factor, with that. And I wondered, does this age with the audience that was Zazen's audience? And in many cases, I think it does. And in many cases, I don't expect it will. It's also very different in the sense that I was trying for something slightly different. But I think the people who were drawn to Zazen because of the questions that were raised about how do we live in this world, or what do you do with what's wrong? I think those same questions in other ways and are in this novel.
Yeah, what do you do when what's wrong? If I may reference back to books that you loved as a child, and some of them are referenced in here, a laugh out loud moment, Essex having to have read Little Woman. You're not Joe, you're Lori. That whole argument was lovely. And the dialogue in this is lovely. You don't have a sister.
I have two half sisters.
Oh, you have two sisters.
We weren't really raised together. One I met through Ancestry a year ago. She's wonderful. Yeah.
Nice.
And then the other one is my younger half sister, and she was raised. We were not raised in the same places. We're 8 years apart. But yes, I do. But my brother and I were very close.
Yeah, the sibling talking in here back and forth. You just nail it. I am one of the oldest of 4 sisters, and so reading this, the bickering and the fighting and all of this is just great. And then to find out. Now I can't even sit. Oh, it's one of the great reveals in the book. And these two sisters are so different yet so alike and so competitive. Was a great reveal, and I can't say anything because then, I mean, that's in the middle of the book, and it's when Cheyenne finds their mother. So, all right, for those of you that have read it, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. So one of the other cool things is some of the words in here Rashi. I had to look that up. Thank you, Google. So I did not know anything about Buddhism, which is important in this book. How was that a conscious decision to incorporate that as you were writing, as these characters came to you? You knew that one of them was going, or that was part of the path?
You know, I think that really what was fascinating to me, I mean, I've definitely like completely gone down rabbit holes around Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for years at different times, and was fascinated with lots of different elements of the philosophical thought in various, you know, I tend to be a syncretist. So I want to go down and I want to
Hold
look
on,
at.
please. I need to go Google that. Syncretist. Seriously, Vanessa, I
Yeah.
love the way you talk and the way you're speaking, and it's great. What is
Okay.
synchronous?
So meaning I'm trying to justify everything together into a system in some ways to
Okay.
understand it, right? Like, so if I'm sitting there and I'm saying, well, this is exactly this belief about this, and this is this camp's belief, I'm asking myself why, where did it arise from? How is it different? What are the conflicts? Where do they, you know, how does it, you know, and so I'm asking myself these questions. This is how I think about things. And so I've gone through that process quite a lot over some years. In this case, I wasn't as consumed. I mean, some of those questions were in Zazen, entitled Zazen, but in this case, I wasn't so consumed with that. It was more this idea of somebody being able to step out of the world. And where do they go? Like, where do people go when we can't see them? You know, they go to jail, they go to monasteries, they go to, you know, they just go off grid. Like, where do they go when we can't see them? And this idea that this person was, you know, was just sort of brought into this other space was part of what was interesting to me. But there was also and is also I have, when I'm writing, I try to move very close to the things that disturb me, that I'm intrigued with.
Okay.
Because often I find that, um, you know, it's often true that the things we do best are the worst things about us, or vice versa. That there's this relationship between like what we're really good at is the same thing that can kill us.
Okay.
You know, I see as a nation, as a, you know, I mean, there's all sorts of ways that this double-edged, you know, this double-edged sword happens.
Okay.
And so when I'm thinking about identity, or I'm thinking about reinvention of self, or I'm thinking about detachment, or like how close are you to people? How much does what they do matter?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is perspective? That question is often with me. And that I was very fascinated with this one character, with this question of, is she offering some kind of liberation from, you know, the travails of the world, or is she just has no empathy? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is there, where are those things? And so much of that can be reflected, particularly in a personage, right? Like, if you have a Roshi, or you have somebody who's an honorific in some court, you know, the guru culture.
Yes.
That can be in there. And the Roshi in this novel is not, that's actually goes to Zen and is a different thing. So I don't want to like equate Roshis with guru models, but like, you know.
There's that. Well, we can talk about reinvention, because everybody in this book, everyone works on changing themselves, but not in a way that one would typically imagine. And one of the characters later in the book says, which none of us has to carry a history we don't want. And so I remember Livia and Cheyenne splitting at a gas station at one point. Oh, she'll be fine. Oh, but yeah, they still come back together. But can you talk about how trauma really informs all of the characters and how that plays in their decisions?
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, when you know, the character says none of us have to carry a history we don't want, that's not something I believe. That's a perfect example of what I mean. Something that I think is a dangerous idea, that I'm intrigued by, and that I also see it as extremely dangerous.
Well, all of them, yeah, they all work to change their trajectory, or change. I mean, even Kirsten from the very beginning agreeing to this deal, to raise the children,
right.
And letting the mother go away. I mean, she's changing her identity, or does she, you know, being a mom. I still don't think Kirsten was meant to be a mom. I don't.
You know, I think that I love her as a mother, and this is why.
Hmm.
One of the great sections to me in understandings for me about writing her as a character comes deeper in the book and is actually only on a page. And you find out she didn't want to be a mom, not really. She had an idea as a 19-year-old
Yep.
that she was not going to have an abortion, that she would just, the other woman who was pregnant at the same time was going to walk, and she was like, I'll take both kids, and then she had to live it out, and that her um, she made that decision out of the goodness of her heart and a great deal of naivete.
Yeah. Well, at
And
19, one would make that call,
right,
you know.
and as a result, the difference between her and other people like her is that she wasn't necessarily a great mom in a lot of ways, but she cared. She couldn't find a way out that didn't come at the cost of the
The
girls.
girls know. And then she
And so
was
they,
actually
yeah,
also an excellent mom with, as far as, bringing in Essex. I mean, there was a bond there that she had with, well, his name was first Christian and then Essex,
yeah,
which is awesome. Again, though, renaming, reinvention, he goes through that. But again, I mean, there was just trauma that it affected all of them.
yeah. I mean, they're growing up really poor,
Yeah.
and they're growing up also not just economically, you know, really screwed, but they're also growing up ideologically opposed to the America that they're having to live
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, with a sense that they don't have a home in it, even if they could afford one.
Yeah.
Like, it's not really that they're always kind of, you know, staying out of the sight of the mainstream a little bit because it's not trustworthy.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a very American thing too. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right. That's all over. There's a lot of that, and it comes around poverty, and it comes around living on the edge, and it comes around all sorts of things. And for Kirsten, she's just trying to raise her kids without, ultimately getting CPS to take, I mean, in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. But she does raise them with an incredible amount of emotional heart and courage and resilience. Um, and, a lot of other problems.
That is true, but with all of those things, there may be a moral compass that is missing, in Cheyenne, particularly. I mean, you write very evocatively, and there are some laugh out loud moments, and there are cringe-worthy scenes of sexual violence. And I'm not just talking about Livy. I mean, for me, Cheyenne is also a perpetrator, twice. Now, I don't know whether it's because I'm reading that as an adult who has children, or also as somebody that's like, well, wait a sec. She as she seems to get out of her situation of poverty, and then or at least the economic circumstances she's in, and then she pees all over it, to put it nicely, by sleeping with half of her husband's class, who are college kids, and she's in her late 20s.
Yeah.
So that's kind of creepy.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, they're not underage, to be clear. And,
All right, 18.
yeah, 18 and 19.
18 and 19. Okay, that's how. All right.
And it's something that she goes through a complete meltdown at that time period. And she's part of her relationship to that whole section is around class,
Yeah.
which is she feels of all the characters, she feels the most uncomfortable being um, in an invisible class.
Mhm.
I don't think it's the money, it's the sense of invisibility. Like, I don't matter to the story that's being
Mhm.
told. Like, what's being told about us just doesn't matter. And she falls in love with somebody, and she has a marriage with them, and she is unable to ever pass. She is unable to ever um, be in that world and not be a pet,
Yeah.
like, oh, here, every time you say something smart, they act like it's a talking lobster. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's a way in which she's constantly in that space. And as she gets more and more frustrated and more lost, and she's in this like very prissy college town, one of the things that Cheyenne does is her sexuality is the front end of all of her experiences. Like, I mean, she is just very,
it's a tool. She uses that. Yeah.
she uses it as a tool. She also uses it to experience the world. I mean, like, she is just very, very physical in good and problematic ways. But, you know, in this case, you know, she's just looking for a way out in another way. And I think that in her perspective in that moment, and that this is something too, it's like on the one hand, like, yeah, it's creepy for sure. On the other hand, you know, when people are of age, they're of age. And she was not a teacher at that school. She
No.
was not, you know what I mean? She was, as she says in her own defense at one point, I was a screwed up person who shouldn't have been married and was stuck somewhere, you know?
And I think even in the scene at a beach party, at a party, you know, she's like, oh, you know, that's nothing. I kissed my brother when he was 4 years younger. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's not okay either. And she even realized, yeah, that's not okay either. that argument's not going to help me here. Which was one of those moments that I'm like, oh gosh.
She's a train wreck. I mean, like, and the thing is also,
but I love her. Well, that's the thing, is that you can love her. And actually, we have a question, actually, and anybody that's watching right now, please submit your questions via the forum, and we will incorporate them into the conversation. And it seems this one is appropriate to ask now. Jesse says, asks, readers go on a personal journey with your characters. Do you go on a journey with them as well, or is the writer's place to plan out the plot and execute the story? So this actually lends itself really well.
I definitely go on a journey with them. I don't plan out the plot. I don't, I'm not sure I execute anything ultimately, but and it is a very emotional thing. And, you know, there was a version of this novel that was longer because I was seeking these characters through scene after scene after scene, and coming to know them in that way. And then then as it gets edited down, you know, those scenes are gone. But I know all the scenes that, for instance, in the discussion we're having, I know all the scenes that aren't in there anymore.
Yeah, the backstory, the BTS, the cut stuff.
About all sorts of stuff. I know those characters, and I know, and so then when you're coming back out and you're editing down, you know, you get into stages of gesture about motive. You get into stage, you know, I mean, like, there's all sorts of ways, and that is very emotional. I feel it in the character. There are characters that, you know, they just do awful things, and there's still a deep emotional connection to them. For me, I think that's true of most writers, but it's not always true. I know writers who are very much like, you know, I plot it out, I look at it this way, I know it, you know, and they're just very different in their approach. And that's why artistic process is different for people. But for me, it is a very emotional thing. And I often don't know what's going to happen to them till shortly before I'm writing it.
Well, I kind of liked how characters in this book came and went. They showed up and then disappeared. My favorite scene is Metal Slovakia. Jirshi? Say
I say
Jirshi. Jirshi. Okay, Jirshi. I will say Jirshi as well. I will give that a shot. Because that could have stood on its own, that section. She learns, I felt so much about itself, but you know, oh, are you Indian? No, I'm not Indian. Oh, Jirshi is not Indian either. He's Czechoslovakian. I mean, that was like almost like a standalone story. And I also had to Google something for that. Rambutan. I'd never heard of that fruit. Thank you.
Yes.
For a fruitarian. He had a lot of fruit coming to him in the middle of nowhere, Vanessa. A lot of fruit. But I like that a lot. Did you ever, as you were writing this over the 8-year time period, did some of it like go into short stories? Because you write other things as well other than novels.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of a obsessive person, and so when I'm locked on something, I'm kind of locked on something. It would probably serve my mental health and everybody else's around me better if I were less that way. But you know, no, I didn't take things off into short stories. I had other sections in the novel in different times and places, and you know, as those things are gone, you know, they live in the sort of echo of the novel that I experienced, which is slightly different from the novel that other people will experience.
Well, and that also goes to reading it and loving it now, reading it in 10 years, reading it, being able to identify with things as you're reading things. One of the other neat arcs in the book, or arc is probably the incorrect term, but the appearances of ghosts. What led you to incorporate these ghosts that appear? One is Lejeune, did I say that correctly? Marine, a former Marine, and the other one is Sir John Raleigh.
Walter Raleigh. Sir
Walter Raleigh. There you go. Sorry. So, what would you say that those are important so that people don't just gloss over them?
Oh, you can't gloss over them.
Oh, well, you might if you're on a screen, and when you read it hard in this beautiful book, then it's easier to go like, wait. And
no, people gloss over all sorts of stuff. I don't say that seriously. I mean, I gloss over, place description 90% of the time. I'm like, up to the dialogue sometimes.
Well, yeah, and your dialogue is really, again, just the way that it goes back and forth, Vanessa. You're there. You feel like you're there. You're looking in, and you're living. But let's talk about your incorporation of the ghost, please.
So, when I was writing the book, the way I began to feel about it was that the America of the book is kind of haunting the characters a little bit. And it's not that it's meant to be some super heavy-handed thing. It's more that it's an ambience, it's a hue, it's a shadow. At times it steps into a place of character. At times it sort of comes out into them. And when it does, I wanted to find a way. I was looking for language to describe something very specific, but that was hard to describe. And I found, as I wanted to talk about it, that moving into that these characters, Walter Raleigh, sort of appeared. And I say appeared because I really write through free writing. So I do a massive amount of free writing. And so when I free write dialogue, and so I'm trying to generate that way. And if I've got something I'm trying to work out in my mind, a character might start to come through that way. And with Raleigh, there's always this question of like, are they ghosts? Are they sort of figurative ways of talking about
imaginations? Or
they, and I was trying to, have that line. I think I was more, they were less ghosts initially and more sort of in the narration of, my editor referred to the narration at one point as all history ruminating on itself, which he did not mean as a compliment, but he helped me make that work. So, God love him. He's an amazing man. But I think that I needed, I feel like there's a haunting that happens to these characters. These characters are focused on their lives. They're not focused on a big political vision. They're not focused on, but they're very aware that they don't count to the story they're in. They're very aware that like the great story of whatever that's being written, whether it's pop culture, whether it's, on television, whether it's, in the American myth, they're not in it. It's not about them. They are invisible to that story. So there's that sense that is there, but there's not a sense, there's not some deep analysis about it. Kirsten has some of that, but there's not, they are not in that way political. However, they walk through a world that is political. They walk through a world that, has the ghost of First Nations. They walk through a world that has, where the Confederacy is still shimmering in the hills. They walk through a world where all of these other things are still true. And so Raleigh and Lejeune came up kind of naturally, but dialing them in was a little bit harder. And Raleigh, because, he's the first, Roanoke and all the, and one of the things I was fascinated with Raleigh is, he goes and blows it with Roanoke. I mean, just blows it with all of his investments and loses a bunch of money. But then it's right around when the corporation's being invented. So all of a sudden there's this new, I mean, imagine it from, we take it for granted, but imagine like somebody says, oh, we're going to invent something that's an imaginary thing that can take the blame for things, and yet you will not be it's like a magic shield. You know, it's another ghost-like apparition, you know. So he incorporates, and he starts to be able to take these missions where, you know, if he loses, he loses, you know, it's not really on him, you know. And so he becomes this, thinking about somebody who's looking for gold, always looking for the next thing, always sort of feeling like I can land on these shores, and what I take, I take. And if I blow it and strand people there and starve them, and, you know, or like subjugate, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm a corporation. Like, he's got that, but he's also haunted. He's unable to leave the land. He's like haunting. Okay. He's haunted as well. You know, he knows something's wrong and can't put his finger on it. You know?
Is that why the correlations of like that when he appears, it's Livy that, you know, it is there as who's kind of going through some of those same things? I feel like I'm writing a paper. Is it, you know, because then, you know, she hates politics, and she's like, meanwhile, getting involved with this woman that's her thing.
Well, with Livy, it's more that the, you know, Livy has this belief that, you know, is really strong in her, that, you know, you shouldn't complain, and you should just, you know, you can go out and find your way. And with, you know, the fishing stuff, you know, what she's having to do is what Raleigh had to do a little bit, which is say, do I cut my losses?
Yeah.
You know, what investment is in me? Now, in her case, her cutting her losses is literally like, I only have a one-way ticket. I'm stuck out here. I'm in terrible, terrible crisis. Do I try to get on that ship and just hope it works out, or do I try to find a way back? Like, it's a different level, but in her mind there are parallels. Raleigh, when Raleigh sees Livy, doesn't understand these. He's just like, go forth, you know what I mean? Yeah. But there's Raleigh accompanies her because the part of Livy that is also exploratory and, you know, committed and all of that has that whole dark side, you know, as well, which is that Raleigh has, you know, that whole sort of, you know, and so, yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, the combination then of when Essex becomes a Marine and Lejeune, that correlation works as well.
Yes, because John Arthur Lejeune was, you know, known very much as a Marine's Marine. Camp Lejeune is named for him. But he was very tied to, historically, you know, to American imperialism as it really makes its debut on the world stage in like 1905, 1910 with the Panama Canal, with, you know, with Guam, with these questions of does the Constitution follow the flag? And he is the working end of this stuff. You know, he's landing on the, you know, he is in all of these hot spots. And he's the son of a Confederate captain. And, you know, and yet he's this big unionist, but it's hard to tell how much of it is believed or not believed, or, you know, I mean, there's a remove that, and so for Essex, you know, I think Essex is looking for, you know, a model of something, but he's a problematic model as well. And so, and then there is another ghost in there, which is in many ways Cheyenne's ghost is, you know, Justine, or it's the, you know, it's the idea of the mother.
But she's real life.
Yeah.
If she gets found, I don't know. Maybe people haven't read that far. What can we say? There is that way. There is a question regarding your writing process from Jesse. You mentioned free writing. Is that a way to exercise a writer's muscles, or does it actually generate parts of the book that you're working on? So when you are free writing, is it necessarily with your book?
I find it really does generate parts of the book. It's my way in. I don't really sit down and go, what do I want to write about? I mean, I will in some ways, like, what am I afraid to write about? I'll think about things like that. What scares me? What do I think I don't do well? But free writing for me is my only way in. I don't know how to, I just start by free writing dialogue, and I usually just like write a sentence, and question form. And then I hit on an interesting question, and then I can tell it's interesting to me because then there's an answer that counters it, and that's where I start. And so then I'm going back and forth with that kind of Socratic way. And what begins to emerge is positions and characters and conflict a little bit, right? And so then I play with it. So it's a, starting one thing and then pushing it along. Now I don't free write once I have things going. Um, I might be free writing some and just very steadily working along with other things, but it is essential to my process with it.
Well, that's in writing. The Great Offshore Grounds.
Yes.
Which is just, did I mention this, Beck? I love the edges. Though I want to talk about something that you recently wrote for the Daily Beast, which is a different kind of writing that you also do, about how the caretakers, CNAs, caretaking nursing assistants, and how that is actually affecting our country right now. I think that is, and does that writing, does that come from, okay, I don't want to say your day job, but I mean, really how you're a union organizer and then being able to write about a very overworked, underpaid section of our country that right now is essential workers that are getting the shaft, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, let me do one correction on that. Was years ago, I was a union organizer.
Oh, thank you.
And then I left and ended up spending the next 16 years largely, working as being a student or working as an artist or, writing things like that, driving cab,
being a mom,
being a
that
mom,
when that happened. Okay.
All of those things. And then when the book got finished and it went in towards the publishing stream of it, I had been losing my mind about, where we're at in this country and things that are going on. And I really felt like my experiences I felt very guilty about having experience and opinions and thoughts and ideas about how people can organize together, not just with unions, but in just sort of like how you put what leadership means, what it can mean, how you can call it out of other people, all those skills and things. I just had nowhere to put them. And so I took a position thinking, for like 6 months in between to go back and do some union organizing. And I got immediately just sucked right back in. And so I've been working for the last year and a half for a union here where we represent half the nursing home workers in the state. And then there's also some assisted living facilities. But in general, some of the stuff I wrote that article about is I spent time in other states too, working with people organizing. And so it's a compilation, what I was writing about in that article is a compilation of many, many, many things that I hear and experience all the time. And I'll tell you, one of the things that makes me crazy is I can't, it's not appropriate for me to write a big, long reported piece on it because I'm holding a position right now. So I was able to do it more as a straight up, like, here's my opinion, here's what I saw, leaving it there. It's not appropriate in this position for me to do it. I will when I get a chance at some point because it's criminal what's going on. It's so, we have, as most people know, the long-term care industry, why is it so poorly paid, so devastated, all of this? And you always hear, well, it's Medicaid. It's like, no, it's women. It's because it's women's, like 99% women and a good chunk of people of color. And those are the caretakers in our world. And they always have been. And they've always been the unpaid labor or the lesser paid labor in what that means. But what it means really for now is that we have a lot of these places where they're crying poor, but they're hedge fund, millionaires who are all bought into the real estate side of it. And so they jack up the rent and then they are also owning or operating the facilities and they're charging the rents that mean there's no profit, there's no margin to pay their workers. But there's really no excuse. I mean, they're charging anyway. The bigger part of it is that we need to find another way because I work all the time with workers who leave their own kids. Sometimes they've had to leave them for months because it's not safe. They don't have enough PPE to be able to protect their family. So they take their 7-year-old and they bring it to the grandmother and they say, honey, I will see you in 2 or 3 months. I cannot risk your life, right? And I have to take care of this person. And they make 14, 12, 16 at best an hour in most of these places, and they have their lives. And people don't realize that when the government help came down for the extra PTO and stuff like that, it exempted healthcare workers because they were considered too essential.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like the bind that these people are put under again and again and again, and they're going to break.
Yeah.
They are the ones holding this culture
Everything together.
What do you
right
think
now.
is going to happen with the gray tsunami?
Mhm.
Who cares for these people?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not a good enough person, you know, to do that work. And I meet people all the time who are great leaders and amazing people, and they are doing God's work, and they are dying from it.
Yeah.
And it is just, so I have feelings about that.
Heartbreaking. But all right, all right, I wanted to talk about that because it is important. And the book. And the book. But all right, this will be the last question. We'll wrap it up because I can't believe we've been chatting for almost an hour. But that's what happens when I get to talk to you. Yeah, what are you reading? Claire from Auntie's Books loves asking this question. What books are you reading now, and what authors do you love?
I love many authors.
Many.
Since we were just talking about this, I will shout out Jane McAlevy's books. No Shortcuts and Collective Bargain, her new one, for nonfiction. She is a really powerful writer on subjects like that. I am reading for the first time the Elena Ferrante Napolitano series and Neapolitan series, I guess. And I love it. I am so excited. Recently, what else have I read? You know, I wasn't doing a lot of reading over the last because I've been working so much.
Writing.
And it's one of the great things. I went and got all 4 books of the Neapolitan series, and I'm just in heaven. You know, there's so many other great writers, and I've been reading the books of the people that I'm sort of lucky enough to, you know, when you come out at the same time as a bunch of people, you sort of develop this like, oh, I'm reading their book and I'm reading, you know, so Karolina Slaviak's novel was one that I really, really liked. It came out, I think 2 months ago. Northernmost by Peter Guy is another one, very different from the work that I do, but I really like them.
And no easy beach reads for you. No.
No, you know, my experience of reading something that's like kind of that way is anxiety. I just feel anxiety. I feel like, what am I not paying attention to behind me that I should?
Yeah.
Like, it's a terrible thing.
No, that's totally awesome. That this has been a most enjoyable discussion here at Northwest Passages. Vanessa Veselka talking about selections from the Great Offshore Grounds. It's available at Auntie's or any independent bookstore where you may be, where you're watching this. All of our videos and discussions, they're archived on our video site. You can access it for free. If you feel compelled to buy a ticket, well, hey, no, we take the cash. Instead, make a contribution to the Community Journalism and Civic Engagement Fund via the Anovia Foundation. We appreciate your support. That's what makes Northwest Passages happen. That's what allows us to have fantastic authors like Vanessa Veselka with us tonight. Thank you again so much for being here, Vanessa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.